Hi, this is Carol Mixon from the Arizona Self-Storage Association. Today we're going to be talking about tenant changes and issues. I kind of like this topic because it brings up a variety of things. This is coming from our self-storage training and procedures manual, the virtual manual, that you can also find on the AZSA website. So you can find it there in print or you can listen to it here, either way. Let's get started. Let's talk about documentation of customer contact. You know, it's so important when you have customer contact that you write information down or you put information into the computer. This documentation really helps us. And there's a variety of things that we really need to document. And I put some of those here. Any specials, concessions, free rent, waived fees, those sorts of things, especially because some customers will get the manager and then the assistant and they say, oh, you need to waive my fees, or they said they were going to waive the fees if I had any problem, and so they go back and forth. So it's really good to have notes in the computer when you waive fees. My policy was, the managers can waive a fee, then they need my permission to do a fee waive. So it's important to write it down or make sure it's in the software. It's always a good way to do it. So another thing is the tenant issues reporting, like an incident report. Even though you might write up an incident report, it's a good thing you can either add it to as a document or you can type that in. Other things like the tenant getting injured on the property, that's very important. Anytime a tenant gets hurt, it needs to be in their notes. Anytime the police or emergency services are called, that's an incident report, and that information needs to also go into the software, into the notes. Any tenant violations, these are people who sleep in the space, that tailgate other people and keep going in that way, or walk in as somebody else, puts their code in. So those type of violations. Any violation, again, of that type of thing, it's good to record, because you may have to get rid of that person one way or another, because especially if they're sleeping in it, that's or trying to live out of it, it causes problems. I know I've had actually one of my buildings burned down because someone was trying to live out of there, and they had a little burner started and it caught fire, and it lost a whole building just because they were trying to do something they shouldn't be doing in the storage space. Also, delinquent tenant communications. Every time you contact someone, put it in the notes. Any written change of address, and that email address, also any alternate name changes the customer makes. When you receive like a United States Postal Service, the yellow sticker with a change of address, put that in there, because sometimes it just loses, you may lose a file, you may lose something, and you need to make sure that if it's in the notes, at least you have it in the second place. A customer space with no lock or a company lock only on it, you're thinking, okay, there's something amiss here. We've got the company space, with no lock, or that the company lock only. Let's find out what's happening with that. Also, any criminal activity that may be reported. If someone says, yes, I think this guy's been looking in my unit or has gotten into my unit, he had something in mind. And believe me, I believe those things happen. And in fact, I saw a report recently in Arizona where there was one tenant stealing out of another tenant's space. And he would go in and kind of look, and then he would break into the space and then get his stuff, and then he would take it to his house. And this guy put a tracker on a piece of his equipment, and it tracked it back to this guy that was at the storage property also, to his home. So they found it. It was very interesting. We definitely have interesting customers, that's for sure. So you want to also, again, any criminal activity should be reported. Yes, I've had people that have sold drugs out of a space. In fact, they would wait till the storage office was closed and there was no management or manager's residence or apartment there, and so my managers left, and they would put out their chairs, and they put out a boom box, and the people next door that were that were the housing area that was next door to us, they were the ones that actually told us about what was happening. But they would have people, they give them the code to the gate. They would come in, they do their sale of selling the marijuana there, and they would take the money, and the people would drive in. They would take the money and do it all the other process. And I guess they got up out of their chairs to do it, but anyway, and then they would drive out. I was like, oh my gosh. And it took us like a couple of weeks to figure that out before the other residents complained about it. But when I found out, I'm like, okay, they were upset with me that I gave them a notice to vacate, and they didn't like that. So I went up on their rent for like 500 a month because they didn't like that so much. And I kept their gate hours just to the office hours. They didn't like that, but that's, that's the way it is. And we documented all of that in the customer communication in case there was ever an issue. And search warrants, I've had lots of search warrants over the years. You want to, I make a copy of a search warrant. If they bring it in, you can make a copy of it. They may not give you that one because they use it. They'll keep that. And sometimes they leave it. I don't know. It just depends on the police that you're dealing with or whoever you're dealing with. But I like to make a copy and make sure it's in the customer's account or in their folder. Sometimes they've found drugs. Sometimes they found just all kinds of stuff. I had one space that we found a little over $250,000 in cash. When the manager and I opened up the space and it was just a duffel bag in this storage space, I said, are you going to open it? And he goes, oh, I have to open it? It's like, well, yeah, you have to open it because you're a guy. You go open it. So he unzips this thing, and I'm thinking it's going to be full of porn or dirty clothes or something. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I thought it wasn't going to be normal because that's the only thing that was in the space. It was full of cash. So we contacted the authorities, and they came out and they gave us a little slip. I don't know whatever happened to all that money. I know it left in the back of a police car. They did give us, they didn't count it, but they did say that, so many, I don't know, they counted something, but it wasn't, how much money was in there. But I just wonder, because the manager looked at me and he's like, Acapulco? I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think we could get anywhere very far with this money without somebody coming after us. And he goes, yeah, like my wife. I was like, yeah, maybe so. So anyway, it was it's tempting for everyone, but I that for me was not tempting at all because I had a feeling that it would be a Breaking Bad situation. There would be bad people coming after me. So think about the search warrants, the break-ins. That if there's a break-in, documented in every space that was broken into. Anyone, if you suspected that that some lock was tampered with, put the notes on that customer's account. Make sure if you have space inspections for like leaks or pest problems, things like that. I know that sometimes people will say, oh, you guys have a mouse problem or something like that. Well, generally, most of the time, with the type of buildings we have with the metal and everything, we don't have them there originally. People bring them in their boxes. That's generally how we get it. Not always, but sometimes. And if something like that happens, leaks, things like that, if you have those kind of problems, make a note in the computer, and then that way we can at least say on this date we found it and we contacted the customer and let them know of the problem. Also, anytime that you take care, custody, and control of the tenant space, and that means when like you found a space unlocked and that you put your company lock on there. See, now if I did that, I would put the company lock on there, but I would also put a seal, one of the plastic seals, and I would completely seal it, and I would make a report, and I would put the seal number on there, and I put all of that information into the computer as far as that customer's space, so the notes would reflect when we found it, what we did, how we overlocked it, everything. So it's very clear that we followed a procedure as soon as we knew about it, including contacting the customer. This is really important. And I know you think, oh boy, this is kind of boring stuff to have to do, talking about documentation, but it's very critical, especially if you ever get in trouble with the law, that you have done something and you show a pattern of what you've done and it was good for the customer. So remember, anytime you're documenting, what you're talking to the customer about, any messages that you've left on the tenant's voicemail should be noted. In fact, if you'd say, I did all my calls this morning. As soon as you do a call to a courtesy call, like before they get their late fee, for example, courtesy call on such and such date. That's what I put. Courtesy call would mean it's happening prior to them getting the late fee. I like to do courtesy calls. I know some managers like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that until, after they're late. Well, That's why it's called a courtesy. And I know sometimes you think, oh, geez, there's 50 people on the list. But sometimes just a reminder, people appreciate knowing before the late fee goes on when you can't do anything about it after that, or, sometimes you can't, depending on the, ownership or, what your policies are. So you want to make sure if you do a courtesy call that you leave those comments in the notes. So again, if you leave a message with someone other than the tenant, get the responding person's name, make sure you put that in the records. And you're not really supposed to be talking about their debt to someone else, but if you spoke to the wife or, someone or the son or something like that, you want to just say, spoke to Jimmy and Jimmy said his mom would be down to pay, whatever, whatever that is, okay? And if like the home number had been disconnected, call information, try 411 to see if you can get that new phone number if you can, and just show the documentation of your efforts. You also may want to do a little search on the internet. Sometimes the internet can come up with phone numbers for you, like White Pages and US phone numbers and superpages.com. Those are places you can look for people's names. The problem is sometimes people's names are kind of generic and you might get several people that aren't even your tenants, so you have to be careful about that. If you call the tenant at work, be careful never to leave messages that they're delinquent. Never let the employer know that the caller, it's about a debt collection. Simply ask if the tenant or, the person that you're calling for, and leave them a message to call you back, and nothing more than that. You don't have to call and say, that person never pays their rent on time. I call them every single month and they never pay on time. You want to avoid things like that because it doesn't even look good for your company. So think of a more positive way to say and just say, hey, I'm just trying to get a hold of so-and-so and trying to get Donnie Deadbeat down here to pay his rent instead of that. Probably a good idea not to call him Donnie Deadbeat either. So changes of address, doggone it, we're in the moving business and doggone our customers, they move a lot, don't they? It seems that not only that, it seems like people that are in lien status somehow, I look sometimes at my, getting ready to sell something, I'm looking through all the paperwork, I'm thinking, these people have moved 4 times and now we're sending letters to all 4 addresses. I'm like, jeepers. It seems frustrating to have to do that, but sometimes just to be careful, I do that. So remember, you must have written changes of address signed and dated by the tenant before any modifications are really made in the software. You can put it in the notes, but we need it from the tenant. We can't hear it from a friend, can't hear it, something like that. And just because something comes in a different envelope and it has a different address in the top, you have to be very, very careful about that. One of the largest lawsuits in self-storage happened because a manager changed it from a return address label that was on the outside. These people were visiting a friend and they just used one of their envelopes, and then they changed their address there, and they had their stuff sold, and so it was unfortunate, and they lost too. That storage owner lost that suit. So think about this. A signed letter from the tenant or an email address that appears on the tenant's lease agreement is acceptable. Be sure to stamp or write the date that you received the document, and make sure it's in the tenant ledger notes also. So you're stamping the document. I like to attach it to the rental agreement or the lease agreement because I just think that always keeps the latest change of address. And sometimes I'll look through files like getting ready to auction someone, I'm thinking, they have 5 changes of address clipped, and then because I ask them to staple them on the rental agreement in order, so the next one will just go on top and on top. I'm like, wow, 5 times they've moved. That's pretty, but that happens. I have to say I've been moving a lot myself lately, unfortunately. So remember that none of the following qualifies as written notice. The yellow United States Postal Service returned mail stickers, that's not a written notice from the customer. Checks bearing addresses given in payments, you can't say, oh, look, their check says this address. Sometimes I've used old checks and they've had old addresses on them. Or return addresses on envelopes. So be very, very careful. You can note those somewhere, but you do not change the address unless it comes from the customer and it's signed and written to you. Keep a record of such alternate addresses. Again, though, it's important to do that. And remember, just keep them in the file. And especially if it's going to a lien sale, you wanted to send, I send it to every single address that I know. And then I'm not in trouble for any other problems. That if I'm thinking, if I do all three, then I'm in good shape. Remember, though, if you'd like more information about this, the sale and foreclosure manual can help you with that. And you can find that on the AZSA website. So changes of address. When you receive any information that suggests there may be the change of address, take the following steps. First off, document the forwarding address from a yellow sticker. And I wanted to show you the yellow stickers here because sometimes they're different. They're not always the same. The top one here has the James person, and he's on Smile Lane. So I guess it's in Sweetness, Tennessee. I guess that's not real. But the idea is that sometimes you will get an address with a yellow sticker, just like this. And it says return to sender because they only forward it for so long and it went past that time. So now they're going to put a yellow sticker on and ship it back to you. See, I don't even know why that makes a whole lot of sense. If they know the address, why didn't they just move it on to the next one? Because it costs more money to put the sticker on and send it back. But that's our postal service. Now, the bottom one is interesting because they're unable to forward because either they no longer have an address for them to go to, or they weren't left an address. So it comes back to you and there's no forwarding address. So both of those are important to keep in the file. And I'm just saying, letting you know at this point, if I were selling someone, I would also add that Smile Lane apartment to any address or any lien notices that were going out to the customer. That's just a little bonus for today. So remember to place everything into the tenant's file. Send any change of address forms. It's like, for example, as soon as you've got that yellow sticker on the top for James, I would take a change of address form and I would send it to that address. And if you had an email address, I'd send it also and say, and in the email say, hey, we got a yellow sticker back from the United States Postal Service, and this is post office, what do you want to say? Post office, and this is what it said. And then that way you've covered your bases and hopefully they'll get that form back to you. But we do need, in order to change your address, we need your signature on this form saying that this is a good change of address. Now, and don't change it until the tenant contacts you and gives you something signed, because until then, you're better off legally staying with whatever you were given on the rental agreement. Now, I'm going to say that I would also hedge my bets if you were going into a lien sale on sending it to every address you had. And it's just the easiest, most prudent thing that you can do, I think. Now, don't change the tenant contact until you've received that signed information. And also verify the signature with the tenant's signature on the lease agreement. A lot of people don't do that. I tend to just say, managers, just look at it and try. But again, and especially those of you that are doing digital things now, it is very difficult to look at a digital signature. Well, and mine would be almost impossible because I have really, really good handwriting. But when I do digital stuff, I'm like, oh man, it is. Sometimes I just put like a C and then nothing else. I'm just a big old line because it's never going to look right. It's never going to look like my signature. But so I don't really know the answer for trying to compare it with digital signature, but you could certainly try. But normally I would check that tenant signature. And I've had a few that I'm like, oh, this doesn't look like the tenant. And it turned out to be a very upset girlfriend. Yeah, you don't want to make girls mad sometimes. So the changes of address. When you receive a change of address, document it, the forwarding address from the yellow sticker in the computer notes. You want to place the items inside the tenant's file also. I like, if it's a change of address, I staple it to the agreement, but that's my old style kind of thing to do. Send a change of address form so you actually have something more than just the yellow sticker. Send them the form. You can send it like through the postal service. You can email it. Any of that works. But don't change the contact information until you get the signed change of address back from the customer. Look at this signature. I'm not even sure, because especially like when you do things digitally, that's kind of how it turns out. I'm like I don't know how we could ever say that that was the tenant's signature or compare that to what they have. So try your best to verify the signature with the tenant's signature on the lease agreement or on the digital records, which may or may not pan out. But if you don't if you don't know what to do, ask a supervisor, ask your owner, let them help you decide what to do. Remember, changes of address, never accept the official change of address over the phone. If the tenant calls with a change of address, yeah, you make notations in the computer's software. That's what you do. And then you immediately mail them. You can email them the form and just make sure that they know, hey, here, I need this officially to change your address. And I will, put the information in, but I can't really change it completely until you send me a written change of address, which they agreed to in the rental agreement if they happen to read that, which is probably not happening. Most people don't. But remember to attach the copy of that form to if you're using paper everything now, if you're using paper and not, otherwise you're using digital. But if you did keep a paper copy of the rental agreement and everything, attach it to the rental agreement, because sometimes I found, well, I think I had one file that probably had maybe 12 changes of address for this tenant, and they weren't all they didn't all have dates on them. So I ended up sending 6 lien notices, which was ridiculously expensive at the time, the way we were sending them out. And I thought, well, to be safe, I don't know on these addresses because no one wrote the dates on them. So, and a lot of times, especially when I do a change, I take over a property and fix it and try to, get it going again well, managed well. I find lots of problems like that. These aren't, things that are happening at my stores, but things when I do the heavy lifting work, the stores that aren't doing well at all. Sometimes bankruptcy courts will call me and say, hey, we need you to take over this property. It's in bankruptcy. So I do that too. So changes of email address. We are communicating with people over email. So you want to make sure that you change they do that. You have that on a change of address form to also have their email address. And be sure to change the address in the software and make note in the ledger that someone, said that and I always go back to that other email address and say, thank you for, updating your email address, just to verify we are sending it, because I had a very upset girlfriend, and she changed the boyfriend's, she wanted to change the boyfriend's address to his storage space. So she was a little vindictive thing. And so she even came in and tried to get in and get us to cut off the lock. She said that her stuff was in there. It was, he paid for it, but it was her stuff. And come to find out, the guy said, no, it's all my stuff. And she wanted in it. So yeah, you can kind of get in a messy situation here. It can get sticky, but be sure to change the address in the management software and to make a note and in the ledger notes, so we know exactly what happened and it's documented. Transferring a tenant. Yes, I don't know what happens, but sometimes people, want to transfer, sometimes downsize, upsize, they didn't look at it the first time, and then you have to transfer it right away. There are times when tenants really need to do that. And when you transfer, you really should complete a new lease agreement. It's the cleanest and safest way to do it. And I know some of you like to do it just in the software, but truly, it's just so much better if you actually have the lease saying all of the right information, because I've noticed on a few transfers that what space they said they transferred into was not even the space they were in. And I was like, oh my gosh, wait a minute, what happened? They put the wrong number that they were transferring into, yet the person went into a different space and it was just a mess. So be sure, and I found that in one of my recent audits. I was like, wow, that was a mess. That whole thing was a problem, because when they transferred it, they didn't do it to the right space. So this is especially important if you have an outdated lease. Whenever you change your lease and then someone's transferring, just use the new rental agreement. It's going to give you the most protection. It's going to be updated. And I normally, even when I get a new agreement. And I have some really old tenants, or it's some big, especially in California. I had a lot of stores in California. So whenever we had something big that was going to affect the way we sold to customers, something like that, I would just send out the new agreements to customers and then say, if it's not back in 30 days, all of the provisions are in, that they are accepting them, even though they didn't send it back, because a lot of people didn't send it back. So make sure you're always just verifying that they went into the correct space and the one that they're transferring in is the right space and everything's correct, because it can get messy. Substituting a tenant in a space. This occurs sometimes. I put this guy and girl here. I love this because sometimes she's transferring it to him or he's transferring it back to her. That whatever's going on. A lot of it's kids and putting in their parents' name because they can't pay for it anymore, something like that. There are just certain circumstances that someone wants removed from the lease agreement because they were both on it and maybe they had a breakup, whatever it is. But you can request for substitution of tenant form. We have that at the AZSA. And by completing it and signing it by both of the existing person that's on the rental agreement and the replacement tenant, it's a really great thing to do, because even though you kind of create a new rental agreement or lease agreement for the replacement tenant, by the use of this form, it really benefits you, because if the replacement tenant fails to sign the new lease, the old tenant remains responsible, which is awesome. And if there is a balance owed on the account, both the old one and the new tenant are responsible for it based on this agreement. And you have the opportunity to have both parties agree to these terms, and they may be imposed as a condition of approving of the replacement. So both parties agree that the state of the contents are accepted as is, because we don't know, they're passing it back and forth, what's happening, but there's no sudden claims of missing property, between one of them and another one that's going to affect our storage owner. So it's a great thing to do. And if you can't find the form, just contact Amy and she'll help you find it on the website. Vacating tenants. There are generally 3 ways a vacancy can occur. The tenant vacates by giving an actual vacate notice, or the tenant vacates without notice. They don't bother to tell us. They just leave and leave it open, leave it empty. An auction tenant is vacated from the space. Well, we sell their goods and then the person that bought it takes all the stuff out. So remember, be careful, because there have been thefts that look like move-outs. So always call and check on that. So the vacate checklist. Use a vacate checklist, because it really helps you. And so many things sometimes in storage, we think, oh, well, I know how to do this. Well, but sometimes we forget things. But it's good to document the space was vacated thoroughly and correctly. You want to physically check that the space, you want to make sure it's empty, even though they walk out and say, hey, I'm out of so-and-so. Well, they don't always do that, and they don't always take everything, or they leave things in the hallway. So you want to physically check the space and be sure it's empty. Check that the space status in the computer notes, and determine whether that the space needs any servicing, because the door may have some issues. There may be some kind of problem with the space, and you want to at least look at it. And that may be the door, the greasing, or whatever, all kinds of things that can happen. And sometimes there's weird stuff on the floor and you think, oh, geez, got to get that cleaned up. But clean and exterminate the space. I think that's just a great thing to do in between customers. And I'll tell you, this is sort of my little thing that I usually tell customers, because if it was my policy to clean the space and just spray the exterminating stuff around the space. And so when people ask about the admin fee, I say, oh yes, we make sure that each time that the customer leaves, we clean and exterminate the space before the new person comes in, and that's why we charge the administrative fee. So it's just a good way to excuse off our fee instead of charging what we used to do as a deposit. So close and lock the space with a vacant space lock, and then you're vacated properly. Make sure you have a vacate checklist, because you want to confirm the vacancy with the tenant, that they're paid beyond the date that they were there, and they don't owe any money. They vacated also in the computer. You did that. You printed a closing ledger. You make sure you remove the tenant's gate access code if you have to do that manually. Sometimes it's automatic now. Pull the tenant's paperwork from the file. Lots of people forget to do that when they move people out, but it should go into that monthly's file of all the move outs. And so it should be, the file should be empty. and then file the lease agreement into that monthly vacate box, and then include a copy of the tenant's closing ledger. And I would say closing ledger and the notes with the reports to your supervisor. So be careful when vacating tenants who are paid in advance and didn't give notice. This really could be a potential break-in, and you may think, oh gosh, that how often does that happen? Well, in my career, it's happened a lot, unfortunately. But notify the tenant with a phone call or an email or a letter confirming that they vacated. It's very important to do that, especially if they didn't notify you that they were vacating. And I would say those of you that are really full right now, you should be working this list. Like all the people that are wanting to vacate, you should say, please let us know if you're vacating, or have a sign on the exiting gate, something like that, where you say, please notify us if you're vacating. You need to know, because if you know in advance, you can have another person ready to move in that space, and we can really maximize the profitability of the store just by doing that. So what do we do about tenants who leave owing money? Again, this is sort of up to your owner, your supervisor, how they want to do this. But unfortunately, this happens. Tenants leave and they owe money. They don't give us notice, but you can call to verify that they vacated and make sure it's not actually someone that stole their stuff. You can try to collect money if you can. Some people have charged it on their credit card because they were on automatic credit card charges. Follow the regular tenant vacate procedures. Don't forget to do that. But after you print the closing ledger, make sure that you note that you wrote off the rent or the late fees if you had to, because they just didn't give you notice. So I love this little kid. He's like, yeah. How do I look when I see someone spending the money that they owe me? Yeah, those customers leaving and they don't tell us, and we sit there and we had people that could have been in there. That's the look we can give them. How about vacating an auction space? That's important too. Look at all those people there. Yeah, a lot of us are doing it online now, but when we had those, I actually had a store in Vegas that I had over 100 people show up to, and once the auction, all the auction shows were out there. That's anyway, storage wars, stuff like that. That kind of made everyone think, oh, this is so much fun. And boy, it's hard to wrangle 100 people and get through an auction pretty quickly. But remember, when you're vacating an auction space, it's important. A tenant who has not paid their rent will receive several lien notices, right? That's going to happen. If they fail to make their payments, the goods will be sold at auction. We can do that in Arizona. And how to foreclose on a lien and conduct the auction is really described in the lien manual, and we have that, and you can get that from our website. And we have an auction when it takes place. The tenants will be vacated from the space, just like a normal vacate procedures, but the paperwork will be filed separately with other auction files. So I like to put them in like some kind of plastic container that's not like a regular cardboard box that I put just all the move outs in, because I know I have to keep those longer. If I'm keeping them 7 years, I'll say, okay, then I just write on the outside what years that it is, something like that. So hopefully we don't have too many auctions, but that it does happen. But be sure the money collected from the auction is applied to the tenant's account, because that's important, because we did get money at the end for what their goods. Sometimes it's more than they owed, and sometimes it's $1 if I can get $1. I'm like, somebody give me $1 and just take this stuff off, please. And I have actually begged people to do that, to get me help to do that. The auction attendee who purchases a space will actually remove all the items from the space, and they should also leave it broom clean, and you should tell them that in advance, or at least by the time they pay. Don't forget to leave it broom clean. Well, thank you so much for listening to the tenant changes and issues. Again, this is Carol Mixon from the Arizona Self-Storage Association, and we thank you so much for listening. And please let us know other topics that you would like to hear. We are here to help, and we really want you to just enjoy all of the things that we have to offer, but we need to know if you need more or something different. So we're all ears to be able to try to help the members, and we help each other. So, and please, if you have other people that aren't part of the association, please help us get them to join too, because it makes a huge difference if we can all come together and work together as an association. We are so much stronger. And yeah, and you make some great friends too, by the way. I've had some lifelong friends in the association in Arizona, so it's very appreciated for sure. Thank you so much for listening, and contact us at azselfstorage.org or at 602-374-7184 or azsa at azselfstorage.org. Any way you want to get us, you'll find us one way or another, and Amy will be able to help you on the other end. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening, and happy renting.